Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Hi, I'm Erin Roberts, and I am a writer, a freelance writer for TTRPGs. And I've written for, I'm sort of a genre or system agnostic writer. So today we're going to be talking about an adventure I wrote for Dungeons and Dragons, but I've also done a lot of writing for Paizo for the Lost Omens Pathfinder, the Pathfinder Lost Omens books, for Starfinder, and I wrote for Hunter the Reckoning recently, and more things in the works. So I like to write adventures, I like to write lore, and I also write stories as well, short stories. So I
Well,
get around.
excellent. That's great. I today we're going to talk about journeys through the Radiant Citadel, and let me share to one of my viewers, kind of like my experience when I first opened this book. So I opened it and I was curious, and the setting was interesting. And then I read the first adventure. It was like for levels 1 and 2, and I'm like, okay, that's not bad. Exploration and so level 1 and 2, so you can't expect anything too heavy. And then I read Written in Blood, and I'm like, what is this? It's just this like it's like horror, adventure, intrigue, mystery. There's so much great elements in it. I enjoyed it very much. So if I may ask, when you were given a story to write for this book, where did you go? Like, what made you decide to tell this story?
So one of the things that I loved about working on this project is that there was an enormous amount of flexibility in what we wanted to write. So sometimes when you're writing as a freelancer, they'll say like, I want you to write a horror themed adventure that takes place in this type of place. They didn't. They just said, we want you to pitch an adventure of your choosing. And I actually come to TTRPG writing from fiction writing. So I was a fiction writer first. And I think that my fiction is super fun and cheery, but others have said that my fiction writing is a little dark and a little creepy. So, not surprising that the first thing I went towards was like, let me come up with something. And the first thing I came up with was something dark and creepy. That's just like, I guess, how my brain works. And one thing that was interesting about working on Radiant Citadel is we were devising a setting and then also an adventure. So they're like setting and the adventure, like you do them sort of together. Whereas a lot of times you're working in an established setting. And if I'm working in an established setting on an adventure, I think, what is an adventure that's going to highlight something about this setting that makes it unique? Where can I lean into the setting? And with the setting of this adventure, Godsbreath, it's all about community and storytelling. And so I was like, how can I lean into this in an adventure? And this is sort of an adventure in which you get to see the way that the ties to other people can be good sometimes, but sometimes you're tied to people and you can't let go of people. And that tie between sort of what is real and among us and what is not real and creepy is can be like a source of danger. And so this really comes out of seeing the like cracked mirror image of what I love about Godsbreath as a community is creating an adventure in which ties to others and storytelling take a creepy route instead of taking like an empowering route.
Hmm. To our viewers, I'm trying not to spoil too much about the adventure. Um,
Same.
but let's just say it deals with begins with a festival celebration, and it goes horribly wrong. There's things from possession to a new undead creature. I guess I guess calling it a soul shaker won't be too spoilery, but
No,
it's an amazing, frightening creature. I love it, and so. What were your inspirations? Like, what sources did you go to construct your story?
so I went first. So I again, like this is a very sort of setting. To me, the adventure really comes out of the setting. And the setting, when they pitched this, they were like, you can write about kind of anything you want, but pitch us something that kind of comes from your lived experience or your family or your history, your culture. We want to bring something a little different to D&D, which often has like a very medieval Tolkien type of world building to it. And so I went looking back into Mississippi and Alabama and the rural South, and specifically Black communities in the rural South. And it isn't all rural. There's a city as well. There's a little bit of New Orleans because it's fantasy, so you can do what you want. So I'm like, I want some of that rural farming ethos. I want some bayou. I want some New Orleans excitement, and I'm going to put them all in one place. And I love horror, and Gothic horror and Black Southern Gothic horror is like a huge, like, you know, when you're telling stories about the South, you often get into that Southern Gothic horror. And so for me, a lot of times that's horror that's based in history. It's based in the body. It's very embodied horror. It's not sort of the stranger that came to town. It's like the thing you don't understand that's like living underneath your floorboards. And so I was like, what can I create that has that feeling of embodied horror, that has that feeling of like it's tied to the community. And that's part of the horror of it, is that it isn't something from away, it's something from like next door. And so that was a lot of my, I don't know if that answered the question, but
No. That's a great answer. Were there any, if college students were to look at this work, what themes do you think they might find in this adventure?
so I think themes of storytelling, of connection and belonging, both for good and for ill, is what they would find in this adventure. Again, I think sort of the idea of change. So one of the things that you find in this adventure that isn't a big spoiler is that in this community of Godsbreath, which is also like really rooted. Again, I said my great uncle wrote a book, Growing Up Black in Rural Mississippi. I use that as like a big touch point. And farming and ruralness is something that I wanted to emphasize, because just like as a real life thing, Black farmers were like a huge portion of the country at one point. It was a huge percentage of farming that were done by Black people in the US. And then over time, for various not great reasons, that changed and folks moved to the north and moved to cities. And nowadays, there aren't as many Black rural farming communities. So I wanted to kind of uplift that. But to make it interesting and make it kind of D&D and make it kind of creepy, one of the things is that the land is dying and the land is growing barren over time, and no one understands why. So this is like a theme. It's not a huge theme of the adventure itself. The adventure is sort of its own contained thing, but there are elements of it. Like one of the things you do during the adventure is like explore these farmhouses that are far away from like kind of everything else. And the reason is people are having to go further and further into these monster infested lands that are creepy and not really unknown that well, because the land that they're used to farming, that they're sort of like, oh, we understand what this is, has begun to dry up. So that sort of theme of like, how do you deal with change? Like, how do you deal with like if the thing that your community relies on is starting to fall apart? What does that drive? And there's a legend that also gets told in this about like a farm that kind of gets swallowed up in a sinkhole. That's like a like an urban legend of this particular community. And that again is about sort of something you thought was familiar. You're living in your farmhouse and whatever, and then like the earth changes and like sucks you in, and like you drown there. And that in itself is again people trying to deal with the changes in the land, and how does community deal with that. So it's like community and the land, and what's the like relationship between them. So I think that's another theme. And then like again like connection and community. So there's somebody in this adventure who really is trying to hold on to connections that they've had, for better or for worse. The family that like drowns in this lake, there is an element of they were trying to stay connected. That's one of the things that leads to their downfall. So I think connection is good, for the record, but I think that any good thing has negative aspects to it that are fun to play with. A lot of times when we write horror, we're looking at what is the underbelly of the things that make us comfortable and safe. And so looking at the underbelly of community connection that makes us feel comfortable and safe was a huge thing for me.
Hmm. So Godsbreath. I love that at the end of the adventure, there's kind of like these adventure seeds and some explanation about the setting for anyone who wants to continue playing in this part of the world. So for me, I'm more visual. If for anyone that's looking for like more resources, or something that they can research so they can continue building Godsbreath, do you recommend any books, any movies, any music to help, I guess in a sense, flesh it out?
Yeah, it's I think getting kind of grounded, like if you can read any sort of like if you want to, depends on which way you want to go with it. So like one of the things in each of these adventures is they'll say like this could be its own place in its own world, or it could be in like one of the D&D settings that we know so well. And mine is the only adventure that they said could be in Ravenloft because they were like, that's creepy. So if you wanted to continue with that creepy theming, I would say really look at Southern Gothic horror, especially Black Southern Gothic horror stories, music, films, etc. Like, what are things that you could draw from? There's a lot of great kind of short stories that exist in that world. You know, read Beloved, Toni Morrison, get creeped out. You know, look at some of Jordan Peele. His stuff doesn't take place in the South necessarily, but I think he has some of that ethos to his work, his horror movies. So things like Us or Nope, like his new, some of that feeling. I think is like might be something that would inspire you if you want to continue down the creepy route. If you don't, and you're like, creepiness done, problem solved, the adventures like are done, and we want to really embrace like what this community is facing now. Uh, so one of the biggest adventure seeds in the setting, I would say, is that Godsbreath is named Godsbreath because generations ago, people were being attacked from a distant land, and their gods came together and brought them to this new place. And it was rough, but they banded together. That's why the community is so strong. That's why storytelling is so strong, because it's like, where did we come from? We got to remember. And now, like I said, the land is growing barren, and there are hints that it will require the blood of one of the gods or a god in order to like bring the land back up to uh, where it should be. Which a raises some questions about what happened when they were originally brought there. Like, did they kill a god the first time? Like, what's going on there? But also, like, what does that mean? Like, for a setting that's so like invested in its gods to have to kill a god, like, how do you do that? Which one? There's a few of them. Like, what do you do there? Like, what happens to the clerics of that god? So to me, like that kind of epic voyage is another way to go forward in the future. And for that, I might look at interesting like folk tales. Like Southern folk tales might be a cool way to look at things. Get a little bit, if you want to lean into the New Orleans of the city promise, which is the main city, you can always look at Mardi Gras, the Gullah and Geechee sort of sea islands off the coast of the Carolinas were an inspiration for me as well. So there are a lot of different things to pull from. Art that I love is Jonathan Green is an artist who draws art of South Carolina islands, beautiful stuff. So there's a lot of really great things. That said, I think, you know, I really want people to not feel like they have to like be too tied to history. Like, you can do sort of whatever you want and have whatever ethos like that you think is works for you. But those are the ones that kind of spoke to me. Oh, and you asked about music. There's a song that they sing in Godsbreath that tells the entire history of the place from the beginning all the way to the current day, called the Awakening Song. And people have asked me, like, what does it sound like? And I'm like, oh, it sounds like so many different things because, you know, over time, musical tastes change. So I would be like, put together a playlist. Maybe it's got a little bit of gospel, a little bit of R&B, a little bit of old Delta blues. So there's a specific type of Mississippi blues that is different than Chicago blues or New Orleans blues. A little jazz in there, just like all of these to me, like Black influenced art forms, forms of music mixed together. That's a little bit of kind of everything, and you can kind of see Godsbreath changing and the music changing over time. So put that on the background and like get inspired. I would say.
Are there any plans to continue writing and got about or about the or make more adventures in God's Breath or expanding the setting?
So the setting has been slightly some of that has already happened. So on DM's Guild, 6 of us who wrote on the original Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel put together a product called Journeys Beyond the Radiant Citadel. One of the things it does, like if you're interested in exploring these gods and god killing, is that the gods of Godsbreath are not stated who they are in the hardback. It just says any pantheon can work, which is cool because like anyone can play into it. But if you want to know what I think and what I decide the gods are, the list of the actual gods of Godsbreath, in my opinion, is in the DM's Guild, as is a new background for people who want to be a religious like cleric, the kind of traveling preacher storyteller called a proclaimer that's from that area. I put a background in there and 2 new sort of smaller encounters. One is inspired by, I don't know if you ever saw this, but like there was something going around on Twitter where it was showing a house on stilts that was like swept away into the sea.
Yes,
I'm like,
yes.
yeah, do you remember seeing that? I was like, boom, totally what happened in Godsbreath. So that happens, but of course there's like a magical, mystical, there's a reason for it that's not just climate change. Like there's an actual beings at work that are doing that. And there's also one that's based on like I think like there was a blood moon while I was writing. And so it's like this full moon comes called the Kindred Moon, and people are doing different things, and it's causing magic to go haywire and causing like lots of different issues. So we've got that, and it's a small kind of additional supplement. I've thought about trying to provide like maybe like in a newsletter, like a few more like seeds of interest. I find it really interesting, for example, when the adventure starts at the festival and it doesn't say a lot in the book what the festival is so that DMs can go crazy and decide, like they can decide what they want it to be. But I have my own thoughts on like what people might be doing at the festival, what might be some interesting things you might encounter at the festival, what are additional adventure seeds that festival might send you off to do, aside from the attack that happens at the beginning of this adventure. And so I'm sort of kind of putting some of that together to kind of send out there because I want to give people more cool ideas to think about. And I've been watching actual plays of people doing the adventure and seeing what they do at the festival and saying like, oh, that's a cool idea. Like that's an interesting way to get the story started.
Oh wow, I'll put a link in the description for anyone who wants to check out the DM's Guild. Was it Journeys to the
Beyond the Radiant Citadel.
Okay, excellent. For anyone that wants to see more of your work, I know you mentioned short stories, and where can they go to find more of your work?
Sure. I think the best place to go is to my website, which is writingwonder.com. So the word writing, WRITING WONDER.com. Or follow me on Twitter. I'm Narelle, which is NIRELE. I always tell people it is L Erin backwards because I am not good at Spanish. So that is a good place to see what I'm up to. And yeah, if you like other sort of creepiness, I've written, like I said, for Hunter the Reckoning, I got to create a lot of creepy antagonists and like creepy organizations that exist in that sort of, dark people versus the supernatural world. I have stuff upcoming. I contributed to the new Dragonlance adventure book that's coming up in December. So look for, can't say much yet because we're just not saying much yet about what is in there, but you'll see more of my stuff in there. And if you want to read like short stories and things that I've written, that definitely is a place to find me.
Okay, excellent. Well, Erin, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about your work. Again, I enjoy it immensely, and
Oh, thank you
I
so much.
and I can't wait to torture my players with this adventure.
Yes.
So to viewers out there, thank you for checking us out. Please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos. You take care.